Welcome back, geniuses. Let us study the neuro part of neuroplasticity. Neuro means brain. So now we will study what the brain is like under a microscope, and before that we will study what the brain is like without a microscope. So let us get started. The brain without a microscope. Here is your brain. Wait a minute. This is an egg. This is not your brain. Your brain is more like this, right? It has these stuff, these grooves. Grooves, are they that important? Well, they are infinitely important. In fact, it is thanks to these grooves that we know that neuroplasticity is a thing. See, it wasn't always that obvious that the brain was plastic. Let me tell you a little story about a guy that I totally love. That guy is named Cajal. He was a neuroscientist, a Spanish neuroscientist from the early 1900s. In fact, he is the father of neuroscience. That's because he was the first guy who was able to cut slices into the brain and see those tiny brain cells called neurons. So he's the discoverer of the neuron. He is the Christopher Columbus of the brain. And Cajal was very happy with what he found. And Cajal deeply believed that our brains had infinite potential and our brains could grow infinitely. But he is a scientist, and when you're a scientist, it's not about what you believe, it's about what you can prove. And if you can't prove something, you must not say it. And Cajal couldn't prove that the brain could grow. In fact, at that time, all the evidence seemed to indicate that the brain couldn't grow. And actually what led people to think that the brain couldn't grow was simple. See, let's say this is you, and let's say we want to know if your muscles can grow or not. Well, your muscles can grow and you can become V-shaped. So your muscles have grown, so muscles can grow. But your brain is inside this bone called your skull, and since your bone cannot open and grow, your brain cannot grow in size. So since it can't grow in size, it can grow, right? Well, at least in the early 1900s, that's what we seem to think. So Cajal was sad because he couldn't prove what he believed. And he kind of had to say that, well, the brain can't grow, or said something like, it seems like the brain can't grow. But then he kind of gave some place for hope, and he said that future generations may prove the opposite. He was literally asking us to please prove that your brains can grow. And that's what was done. And we will talk more about how it was done in the plasticity chapter. But right now we were talking about grooves. And then I started telling you about Cajal and this stuff. What does it have to do with grooves? Well, it has everything to do with grooves. Let me illustrate with an example. Let's say I have a box and I have a perfectly circular brain. And the box is your skull. Obviously, your skull is not square, but it's easier to explain with a square skull. So you got your square skull, and you got your brain, and your brain is kind of upset because your brain wants to grow, but it doesn't have space. Then your brain is going to come up with a great idea. So this is the box again, and what your brain is going to do is it will dig grooves. And if here the surface of it was like 50 centimeters, I'm giving crazy numbers just for illustration. Here the surface, if you were to grab a tape ruler and measure all this distance over here, well, the surface might be something like 500 centimeters or more. So this is the trick for those grooves. And if your brain wants to grow furthermore, it can dig deeper and deeper grooves. And this is a trick that is found throughout the body. It's also found in the intestines. Our intestines are very small, but they cover a surface of a football stadium. And it's the same trick. In your intestine, you got grooves. The same thing happens with our lungs, which can cover a very, very big surface because in those tiny spaces, there are grooves. So this is what the grooves are for in the brain. And by the way, the name of grooves is sulci in plural, and in singular that is sulcus. I'm just telling you this to seem smart. Do I seem smart? Anyway, this ends our first video. In the next video, we will see what are the parts of the brain that are most important when it comes to rewire your brain. That is, you will know what the most important parts are. So when you want to rewire, you will know what part to rewire and what part not to rewire. So, see you in the next video.